On a quiet Warrington street, in the pre-dawn gloom where frost-covered windshields and a delivery van sat silently cooling, there was no sign of the coming storm. Behind the windows of a nondescript office building, marked with the sign of a commercial firm, lay the headquarters of one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in British history. The police had been watching for months, logging every delivery, every face, every van. The goal wasn't just to stop another deal, but to cut the head off the Hydra, because the men behind it weren't street-level dealers. They were Leon and Anthony Cullen, and this is the story of how two twin brothers built a criminal empire behind closed doors and the facades of legitimate businesses. Longford, on the northern edge of Warrington, rows of red brick houses, broken curbs, and the quiet tension of a town caught between two giants, Liverpool to the west and Manchester to the east. Leon and Anthony Cullen were born here in 1987. As identical twins, they had starkly different personalities. Anthony was smoother, calmer, and quick to smile. The kind of kid teachers say has potential. He knew how to keep his cool and stay out of trouble, at least on the surface. Leon was his complete opposite, hot-tempered, intense, and prone to anger. As a teenager, he shifted between being the life of the party and someone to be feared. Two things united them: an unshakable loyalty to each other and boundless ambition. Their parents weren't criminals, but the streets had their own set of rules. In the late 90s, the northwest of England was flooded with drugs. Manchester and Liverpool were locked in fierce turf wars, and the fallout reached Warrington. Class A drugs were everywhere, and the people selling them didn't look poor. Expensive watches, BMWs, designer jackets. The dealers looked like stars. The Cullen twins watched and learned. They started small, but even their first steps showed a cold, calculated approach. By 18, they were done playing in the sandbox and started building serious, quiet connections, mostly through Liverpool channels. Every mistake they saw others make became a lesson for them. They decided to be professionals, not reckless, and that was just the beginning. The First Empire. By the early 2010s, the Cullen brothers were no longer just foot soldiers. They were running their own network, operating cautiously through trusted people. Their first front was a company called Spot On Signs, which handled printing and signage. But behind the facade of a legitimate business was the control center for a growing operation dealing in Class A drugs. It was a place to launder money, store product, and maintain a veneer of legality. They kept strict records, spreadsheets of debtors, delivery volumes, and payments. Everything was systematized, just like in a real corporation. But a shadow was already looming. In late 2010, the Cheshire Police launched Operation Cortex, a full-scale undercover investigation using surveillance teams, informants, and undercover agents. They identified safe houses, burner phones, and storage locations. Couriers made regular trips from Liverpool to Warrington. Leon stayed in the shadows, never touching the drugs, but giving the orders. In early 2011, the police struck. A series of raids across Warrington uncovered cocaine, cash, phones, and most importantly, detailed records. 1. These records were the key, revealing the gang's hierarchy and structure. Leon was arrested and later convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, receiving a sentence of 9 years and 8 months. Anthony, who initially avoided arrest, tried to keep the business afloat, but his freedom was short-lived. Less than a year later, a second police operation, Operation Knock, put him behind bars too. He was found at a production site in a trailer equipped with scales, presses, and blocks of high-purity cocaine. Anthony was sentenced to 5.5 years. It seemed the Cullens' criminal story was over, but for them, prison wasn't the end, just a reset. The Cullen Corporation. By 2015, both brothers were out of prison and quietly got back to business. This time, things were different. They had learned from their mistakes. No direct contact with the product, no flaunting of wealth. The new organization was more structured and harder to track. The new front was a company called Future Press Limited, supposedly dealing in promotional products. In reality, it was a money laundering operation for a network that stretched far beyond Warrington into Merseyside, Greater Manchester, North Wales, and the Northeast. The structure became more rigid. Leon acted as a shadow director, completely removed from the operations. Anthony managed the day-to-day activities: personnel, logistics, and security. Trusted lieutenants were responsible for transport and storage. Enforcers solved problems, quickly and without warning. In this new model, employees were paid a monthly salary with bonuses, and there were clear rules and a system of punishments. They focused on quality, high-purity cocaine that stood out from everything else on the market. This gave them an edge that both customers and competitors noticed. At its peak, the network was bringing in up to £290,000 a month. This money wasn't just hidden in boxes. It was laundered, managed, and reinvested into the business. The plan behind it all was to remain invisible. No online presence, no names on documents, encrypted phones, frequent changes of cars, and safe houses. An army of people worked under the brothers, each knowing only their part of the job. Chris Houghton was the gang's armorer. He was responsible for storing and supplying an impressive arsenal: rifles, pistols, shotguns, silencers, and even hand grenades. Sean Ryan handled the enforcement wing, collecting debts and intimidation. Matthew Spencer, Nigel Girk, and Chris Potter were key figures in logistics, moving huge sums of cash and managing supplies. Dozens of others performed support functions, managing safe houses, storing product, and working as couriers. Most of them didn't know the full picture, operating on a one job, one name, one van basis. This fragmentation and strict discipline were the keys to the cartel's security. Operation Samurai. By 2016, the Cheshire Police realized something serious was happening in Warrington. The movements were too precise, the money was too fast, but the criminals weren't making any mistakes. They needed more than just suspicions, they needed proof. Thus began Operation Samurai, a deep and resource-intensive surveillance mission targeting the Cullen brothers directly. For 18 months, officers pieced together the puzzle of their network. They tracked couriers, vehicles, and supply routes. They watched meetings that lasted only minutes and handovers where it seemed nothing happened. But in reality, huge assets were being moved. Phones were tapped, addresses were logged and placed under round-the-clock surveillance. The police saw people enter apartments empty-handed and leave with stuffed bags, and vans changing license plates. The brothers never touched the product. The entire chain was multi-layered. The deeper the police dug, the clearer the scale of the operation became. Intelligence linked the Cullens to the Liverpool-based Tobin brothers, Alan and John, who organized a national drug supply network. The Cullens were their regular wholesale clients. The long surveillance culminated in a police operation on the M6 motorway in August 2018, where 186 kilograms of 90% pure cocaine, worth over £20 million, were seized from a van with a false floor, one of the largest seizures in UK history. By early 2019, the surveillance phase was complete. Warrants were signed, phones were being monitored, and safe houses were mapped. The empire built in silence was ready for a loud collapse. The Reckoning and the Ghost Hunt. On the morning of January 10th, 2018, the Cheshire Police launched a devastating strike. Raids were carried out simultaneously at dozens of addresses in and around Warrington. Anthony Cullen was arrested without resistance at one of the key locations identified during Operation Samurai. His arrest signaled the collapse of the entire structure. But while Anthony was in custody, his twin brother had already vanished. One by one, the key members of the gang were detained. Chris Houghton, the armorer, was one of the first to be arrested. An arsenal was found in his apartment behind a false wall, confirming that this was not just a drug gang, but an armed and dangerous organization. Matthew Spencer was stopped on the highway with nearly £105,000 in cash hidden under the floor of his van. Nigel Gerke was caught with £43,700 in a gym bag. Leon Cullen, police believed, had disappeared a few days before the raids began. He left no trace, no phone, no bank transactions, no digital footprint. International arrest warrants were issued for him, but for months there was silence. Leon had always been one step ahead, running his empire through intermediaries. The theory was simple: he had fled abroad. The search lasted for almost 2 years. Finally, in early 2020, a tip came in. Leon had been spotted in Dubai, living under a false name in a rented apartment in a high-rise building. After the information was confirmed, he was arrested in a coordinated operation with the UAE authorities. He didn't resist. Under armed guard, he was brought back to the UK. The man at the top of one of Britain's most structured drug cartels was finally behind bars. Judgment Day. The takedown of the cartel's leadership did not bring peace to Warrington. On the contrary, things only got worse. With the entire network arrested, the structure collapsed, but the tension remained. The resulting power vacuum was immediately filled by competitors. A brutal turf war began. Houses were attacked, couriers disappeared. The police recorded a spike in targeted violence. A grenade was thrown at one house, and 2 shootings occurred. One of the Cullen gang members, Robert Bibby, was placed under police protection due to credible threats to his life. On May 14, 2021, the trial began at Liverpool Crown Court. The prosecution presented a picture of an organized criminal corporation. The defense tried to downplay the defendants' roles. Leon Cullen, participating via video link, claimed he had no direct involvement in the day-to-day operations. However, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge described their activities as a sophisticated, well-planned, and persistent criminal operation. The sentences were severe. Anthony Cullen, co-founder and head of logistics, received 27 years in prison. Leon Cullen, the strategic head who pulled the strings from a distance, was sentenced to 22 years and 6 months. Chris Houghton, the armorer, received 20 years. The other key members of the gang received sentences ranging from 10 to 14 years. The total prison time for all defendants exceeded 185 years. In an unprecedented move, the Cheshire Police distributed aged photos of the Cullen brothers throughout Warrington, showing what they would look like at the end of their prison terms. It was a powerful message designed to dispel the myths of a glamorous gangster life and to vividly demonstrate the real consequences of organized crime. Echoes of the Void. The story of the Cullen brothers is more than just a crime chronicle. It is a multi-layered narrative about temptation, power, and the inevitable fall. Their rise and fall leave behind not only shattered lives and long prison sentences, but also deep scars on the fabric of society, forcing us to reflect on the nature of organized crime and its true consequences. The fall of the Cullen Empire created a vacuum in Warrington's criminal underworld that, as predicted by the laws of both physics and the streets, could not remain empty. The wave of violence that followed is a clear demonstration that dismantling one group, even one as powerful as this, does not solve the root problem. It only triggers a new, often bloodier cycle of struggle for control. For the city's residents, this meant that the apparent calm maintained by the cartel's iron fist was replaced by unpredictable chaos. This raises an uncomfortable question. What is scarier, the tyranny of order or the anarchy of lawlessness? The Cullens' operation with its corporate structure, strict hierarchy, and use of legitimate business fronts, reflects a global trend in the evolution of organized crime. They weren't just thugs, they were calculating businessmen whose products were drugs and fear. Their success, however temporary, was built on the same principles as any successful corporation: effective management, quality control, logistics, and aggressive marketing. This makes combating such syndicates incredibly difficult, requiring law enforcement to use not just force, but complex strategies that include financial intelligence, cybersecurity, and international cooperation. However, the most important lesson of this story lies deeper than police reports and court records. It is in the social roots that feed such criminal trees. The Cullen brothers grew up in an environment where the glamour of criminal wealth seemed to be the only real alternative to the gray reality of a working-class town. For many young people deprived of opportunities and social mobility, the path into a gang is not just a choice, but almost a predetermined outcome. They see in it not only money, but also status, respect, and a sense of belonging, everything that society cannot give them. The police campaign with the aged photos of the brothers was a strong symbolic gesture, an attempt to shatter the romantic aura surrounding the gangster lifestyle. But this war cannot be won with posters alone. As long as economic inequality, social isolation, and a lack of opportunities exist, there will always be new Cullen brothers, ready to take the vacant spot at the top of the criminal pyramid. Thus, the Cullen case is a reminder that a true victory over organized crime lies not only in arrests and prison sentences. It lies in creating a society where young people have real prospects, where education and honest work are valued more than quick money, and where desperation has no chance to take root. Without this, any police operation, even one as successful as Samurai, will only be a temporary victory in an endless war, and the echo of the void left by the fall of one cartel will inevitably be filled by the roar of a new, perhaps even more brutal one. And as one empire falls, a new one always waits in the dark. The question is, who's building it now?